greetings. I extend my warmest welcome to the talk show Education 4.0 for Safe, Sustainable Societies.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the talk show organized by Samurja Educational Society on the theme Education 4.0 for Safe, Sustainable Societies. We appreciate and applaud everyone, our resource speaker, guests, and participant for the zeal to share and passion to learn with Samurja. Samurja means sum of creative energies. Samurja Society is 30 years old and it is working in the field of education besides conducting social outreach programs. I request Monica to kindly play the video of Samurja. Kindly see what Samurja does.
Samurja Educational Society, established in the year 1991, has completed its gratifying journey of 3 decades. The society was conceptualized with the objective of educating children and preparing them to be morally upright and vocationally independent. Ever since its inception, the society has continued to take tiny steps forward, redesigning the educational fabric in all possible ways through various educational activities, besides conducting social outreach programs like the Girl Next Door and the Charity War. Samurja is constantly striving to bring together some of the most ignited minds in the field of education to introduce change in the educational fabric of the nation by providing educational vision, empowering educators, inspiring learners, and elevating various organizations through training sessions, panel discussions, talk shows, conferences, and symposiums. The Society has also conceptualized and published periodicals and magazines for students and teachers. Samurja continues to explore new domains, trends, and landscapes to enrich the educators across the country by equipping them to resolve the academic challenges in their classroom to make teaching and learning more joyous and engaging. It also helps educators realize their vision and collaborate with national and international educators to have sustainable societies and a happy nation, thus redefining the paradigms of Indian education. Jai Hind, Namaskar.
The coronavirus pandemic has seriously upended the education system across the globe. The prolonged closure of schools has also highlighted some underlying vulnerable concern in school system. Latest UNICEF report reveals that more than 168 million children globally have been out of school for almost 1 full year. 280 million have attended schools only for 2 quarters in the previous academic session. Various stakeholders are struggling to address challenges and plug in the learning gaps. Along with the shift from classroom to computer screen, almost all aspects of learnings are being tested. Format of instructions, attendance, evaluation, the role of technology, the human interaction, almost everything has taken a different shape and scope. There is a growing possibility that some of these changes will last even after the school reopen post-pandemic. Learning by screen or remote learning will continue to play a major role even after school reopen. Digitalization of education is the future, and we have been making significant strides in that direction even before the pandemic. Access to high-speed internet, quality bandwidth, and affordable gadgets to access online resources will be the priority, not only in the smaller cities, but also in town, even in the metropolitan cities. The pandemic has put the whole world on a roller coaster, but it has taught some great lessons. A few learnings are: a pandemic can stop the whole world. Innovation and change are important. A new normal is not just possible, it is essential. Necessity is the mother of invention. We already knew. We learned necessity results in quick learning. Word over discussions, deliberations are organized to understand, plan, strategize, to deal with the new challenges, and to swiftly slip into the new standard in education. From the past 2 months, Samurja is inviting experts in school education to deliberate on future proofing of schools, new learning trends, blended learning, cyber challenges and security, technology, and the use of new apps, adapting new normals. Yet, there is one aspect of education that we are trying to explore again and again. We are trying to reimagine education. And that is the topic of the talk show today, Reimagining Education Post-Pandemic. To deliberate on this topic, we have with us veteran in education, a hardcore academician, and one of my favorite teachers. I have learned many things which he never taught me directly. And truly, I admire him. We have with us Professor Rajaram Sharma. I request Rajaram sir to please extend the verbal greeting, and we want you to please switch on the camera at this time.
Okay, good afternoon to all of you. We have had a bit of a technology issue with perhaps my bandwidth not being adequate. And as Mukta ma'am mentioned, this appears to be a universal phenomena and one of those things that we will have to factor in while reimagining education. So for most of the talk, I would have kept my video off. And of course, there would be a screen which would be shared. And I'm very happy that I have been given an opportunity to speak to all of you. And we hope that we will be able to debate some of these issues which concern all of us, concern particularly the children that Mukta ma'am mentioned have been denied what we have conceived as education. There will be a lot more of ideas and issues that we will hopefully debate. And I look forward not only to my presentation, but also to a lot of discussion following the presentation. Thank you.
We welcome you, sir. I request Monica ma'am to please welcome sir with a musical note. Welcome, Rajaram sir. We also have with us a charismatic leader, our mentor, Dr. Rajesh Hasija, Director in the Presta Group of School, who is known for his dynamic approaches in integrating technology and preparing leaders. He does not believe in repeating the processes. Every time he does the things differently. We welcome you, sir. Dr. Hasija.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, and looking forward to hear Dr. Rajaram and other speakers. Probably this is the platform where I can learn something. Thank you very much.
Welcome, sir. We also have with us our mentor, Dr. Harish Chaudhary from IIT Delhi. Sir is from higher education, but his passion and leadership has resulted in evolving a learning community of more than 3 lakh educators from schools in the past 12 years. He has motivated, inspired, encouraged teachers and leaders. We welcome you, sir. Harish Chaudhary, sir. Sir has joined, I think.
Welcome, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Welcome, sir. So we also welcome all our participants, those who have come to listen to sir and enhance their knowledge. Without further delay, I'll request Rajaram sir to please share how you imagine education post-pandemic. Over to Rajaram sir.
Thank you, ma'am. And a very good afternoon to all of you all over again. And I hope that technology would not come in the way of our discussion. And I'll try and see if there is some way in which we can immunize ourselves from technology. One of the themes, one of the strands of what I will be speaking to you is essentially to help learners stay immune to the medium which comes in the way of their learning. Mukta ma'am, kindly confirm to me that I am able to share my screen to all of them. Is my screen being shared?
Yes,
No,
yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Huh? Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So I can begin?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Okay. When we consider education, though this particular codification that you're seeing on the screen is a later codification, the model always has been that
Screen
there
is not-
exists a distinct entity called a sender, and there is an entity called a receiver. You could replace it with a teacher and a student.
Sir, the screen is not
Screen is not
visible.
visible.
Screen is not visible at all, or am I not sharing it?
You have not shared, sir. So you need to share your screen.
Better?
Yes, yes, sir. Now we can see.
Okay, thank you. So this model that has become very popular amongst people who conceive of schooling as a means to education. And throughout this talk, I would also like all of you to kindly attend to these words that we use: education, schooling, learning, teaching, and try and see if there is some way in which you can distinguish between these words and don't, tend to believe that they are one and the same thing. This, I believe, is one of the very important goalposts if we have to reimagine learning, because what I believe has happened over the pandemic, over the 2 odd years that we have kept children away from school, is that this medium that we conceived of between linking the sender to the receiver was in some sense disrupted. And the consequences of that have been perceived not only by teachers, not only by schools, not only by parents, but by children. To a very large extent, children have lost various habits that they had acquired, various things that could have facilitated their growth and development. And we'll try and examine each of these ideas in a little more of a detail. But I would like to draw your attention to this model, which is very popular in the communication theory. One of the interpretations, or one of the good examples of this, is the fact that I am sitting geographically remote from all of you and am able to use the medium of the internet, aided by some software applications, and am able to communicate something to you. To the extent that we have conceived that the sender is capable of sending something, that the language or whichever other tools that the sender is using is not being disrupted, and the medium faithfully transmits these messages across. This model believes that the receiver would receive it. What we will try and argue through this talk is that this might actually be a very simplistic model and might rather be a misleading model as far as teaching learning, as far as schooling, as far as the consequence of schooling, which is education, is concerned. Now, when we try and apply this model to the concept of schooling that we all share, we tend to assume that there would exist a teacher, and that teacher would indulge in creating something that the teacher perceives as teaching learning, and that the learner at the other end would receive all of these, and this would result in learning. I would like you to put a little question mark in front of this proposition, that what the teacher does, which is commonly known as teaching learning, results in the learner learning. Now, many of you would say that, is that not what we have always been told? Yes, we had come to believe this, and I believe that the pandemic has given us an opportunity to sit back, look at this whole model, and see if there is something more that we could do, something that we could do to question this model, something that we could do to enrich this model if this model does yield results. And if it does not, then conceive of something which could be different from this model. I would like to draw your attention to this graph in front of you. This is a typical graph of a school which took its 10th board examination, sent a batch to the 10th board examinations. And I have about 46 students whose marks have been ordered in a kind of a rank order. So you will notice that the child who scored the highest in the class in the school was almost close to about 100%, whereas this child who was at the bottom of the class was below 60, certainly closer to 50 perhaps. This is a profile of a graph which more or less universally across the world every school produces. There could be, depending upon various other considerations, various other parameters, a slight shift in the slope of this curve. There may be more number of children towards the 100. There may be, the least marks scored by a child could be a little higher. There could be schools where the least marks are lower, but you would certainly notice a large spread of marks. The marks scored by children become even more revealing when you look at not the total marks, but look at the marks scored in individual subjects. For instance, the same set of students, when you plot the individual marks scored in each of these subjects, and I have English, I have Hindi, I have mathematics, science, social science, and then the percentage marks. While the percentage marks sort of, gives you some kind of a trend of the whole class, the individual marks scored, and I would like to draw your attention to the right end of this graph, you will notice that the inter-subject variation, that is the marks scored by a child across various subjects, does not vary so much, at least for the last 7 students or the top 7 students in this class. Whereas as you keep coming down the graph towards the left, you will notice that there is enormous variation in this. And also revealing is the fact that that green line and the yellow line that you see in this graph, which represents the mathematics and the science scores, appear to be quite low. Now, every one of us knows that almost every single child was subjected to perhaps the same kind of input. That there was perhaps nothing that the teacher did nothing that the curriculum did, nothing that the syllabus did, nothing that the textbooks did, the activities that the students did, or the effort that the student put in, which would have been interpreted as the student did not perform and therefore the marks are what they are. Every single child went through almost 15 years of input before landing up in this particular situation. Why is it that schooling as a model fails to deliver, fails to provide an opportunity for this graph to be some kind of a flat graph sitting close to 100? Why is it that the child at the bottom, the 46th child in this particular example, should be scoring something like 35 marks in mathematics? Or this other child who's scoring slightly above 40 in mathematics? Why is it that there is no correlation between the marks scored in social sciences, languages, and mathematics and science? Why is it that in some subjects, the child's learning is different from the other? All of us who have been in this business of schooling would readily appreciate that many of these factors which affect the performance of a child has perhaps nothing to do with the child or the teacher or the teaching learning process. That these are basically artifacts of a system that we have created. But we must appreciate that as far as investment of time and effort on the part of the school, on the part of the learner, on the part of the parent, the teacher, nobody had compromised on this whole issue. So what we'll try and argue is to try and see if there is some factor that we somewhere missed along the way, which could perhaps help us understand how we can shift all of these children a little higher, all of these children into a more flatter trajectory, that all children could actually benefit from those 15 years of investment of time and effort into schooling. And that would perhaps be the crux of what I would be discussing with you over the next half an hour or so. Now, what are the predictors of a child being somewhere on this graph? And every parent, every teacher, every student would like to be at the right extreme of this graph. What are those predictors? What are those factors that we will tweak? What are those ideas that do not work in the schooling system? What are those factors that we would like changed so that every child has an equal chance of being there on that right extreme? Are we doing something which could perhaps be inadequate? If we consider what we tried to do over the last 2 years, this was, of course, a forced reaction to a situation which none of us had anticipated. None of us knew what to do with it. And the technology came as a godsend. We believe that the technology is delivering. Perhaps it is. Perhaps quite a number of children are getting what schooling otherwise was offering to these children. Perhaps there is no difference in the learning that those children are experiencing now vis-a-vis the learning that they were experiencing earlier in the formal schooling hours. But a general appreciation of what children are doing, what they could perhaps have done, what habits they have lost, what habits they have gained, what is it that parents and teachers believe has happened with this online classes. There is a suspicion, there is a growing nagging feeling that the weaknesses of the school system somehow got accentuated. That children have lost the habit of attending to learning, that children have not shown the initiative, the perseverance, the interest in learning, that they did not use this opportunity that was provided to them of much larger number of hours on their own, not being locked into a timetable, not being given a structured course in the school. Left to themselves, they did not capitalize on the possibilities that the technology afforded. You will recall that prior to the pandemic, in many contexts, people would have tried to dissuade children from using technology. Now, suddenly, thanks to the context, we have provided almost unlimited access to children to the internet, to a smartphone, to the World Wide Web, to various possibilities of learning. But has learning improved? Has learning at least received higher amount of attention by children? Have they utilized this opportunity? Almost every one of them who have now got an access to a smartphone has the internet with them. So how has their learning changed? What we will try and discuss is whether this got affected not because of the medium, not because of the possibilities of technology, but because of the kind of modeling that we had done to children, the model that we placed in front of children, the idea that we provided to them of how education functions, how schooling is supposed to benefit children, and what children are supposed to do with the time and the facilities that they have access to. And this is something that I would like to propose as a solution, that we need to examine this idea called learning and try and see if all the factors which influence learning can be brought together, reimagined, and children placed in a position where they can benefit much more than what they have till date been benefiting. Now, the graph that I showed you is certainly not the latest graph. So therefore, it has very little to do with the present CBSE formulation of how evaluation are to be done. This is from 2018, nor does it represent that state where CCE used to be a very standard part of it. So we are looking at a third-party examination, an independent examination, which was conducted. And so therefore, the children's performance there appears to at least not be affected by the vagaries of the examination system itself. There was a question paper, children had to prepare for it. They knew what was the syllabus that would be covered in that examination. And they all took a chance and went and attempted to answer the questions that were asked in those question papers. And so therefore, in some sense, at least from the point of view of the model that we have always believed in, it was an examination and objectively show what children have learned. And if that is so, then we will have to account for why is it that there were so many children down there at the bottom, and why were their marks so very divergent across different subjects? And why is it that some children who did get marks score higher in these examinations, what was that differential? What was the child who was sitting on the right corner? How was that child different from the child who was on this left corner? So let's see if we can somehow understand this concept, which might possibly help us reimagine education. So now the question that we are therefore asking is this simplistic model that we post before ourselves, that there would exist a teacher, there would be a classroom, there would be a timetable, there would be a syllabus, a curriculum, textbooks, activities that were done in the classroom, tests, examinations, various other structure that we would provide to this entire thing called teaching learning. Can it foster learning? And for understanding that, we need to understand how we can redefine a learner and learning. Let's examine this a little in detail. Now, one of those things that people learn, and while I am discussing this, I would like to stay out of age classification. So let us conceive of learning by us adults rather than thinking of children, because once we consider children, we will have to account for that they are preschool children, that they are primary school children, that they are younger children who have certain limitations in learning and so on and so forth. So we'll try and avoid that variable, though of course that variable becomes critical when we have to conceive of implementing this idea in a regular school. But we are looking at older children whose at least the habits of learning, at least the capabilities of learning, at least the access to learning is more or less uniform across the age groups. So let us conceive of us learning. Now, what are the things that we learn? One of those important things that we do is learning facts. Maybe we get to know of temperatures, we get to know of currency, money, various other things that we encounter on a day-to-day basis. We believe that we receive and we store this information. Do we merely store this information, or do we do something with it? Hold on to this question. We will not examine it right away, but it might be useful for us to ask what happens to those stored information that we have. The second kind of learning that we all indulge in, I term them as learning of procedures. Imagine the simplest of things, that we teach children how to add numbers. Now, even in that, there is various levels at which we teach them this. The lowest being that you would actually be using, let's say, the fingers on your hand and counting off numbers. So 3 plus 4 would be 3 in your mind, 4 in your hand, and then you go around 4, 5, 6, 7. Now, when you're doing this, you are actually providing some kind of a navigation scheme to that child. You are teaching them a procedure. You're saying, in order for you to arrive at the sum of two numbers, you will have to hold on to that first number as the starting point and then count off the next set of numbers. Let us apply this to a slightly more complex idea of, let's say, playing a musical instrument, a harmonium, let's say, or any instrument that you would like to play. Not only do you need to appreciate that there exists something called a beat, some kind of a pace at which this music has to be played, and the steadiness with which you will have to hold on to that pace in your mind while you're playing. You cannot speed up, you cannot slow down, you cannot go on changing the speed, because there may be accompaniments, there may be a need for grammatically holding on to a particular beat. Then you will also have to attend to the particular notes that you are playing, and the very melodiousness of that song, or the harmony that you're producing, can only be due to those notes being in the positions in which they are. The moment you go haywire in that, anybody who's listening to that music, you yourself, are going to not be very appreciative of it. Then you will have to hold on to the lyrics of that song. Then you will have to hold on to the your voice itself. And so you are trying to bring together a large amount of facts, information that you have already learned, and weave them together in a manner in which there is a very definite way in which you will go from point A to point B, which is why we refer to these as procedures. Now, these procedures are, in a way, verbal procedures, and I sort of jumped the gun when I used an example of playing an instrument, because there is also a physical skill involved in the playing of that instrument. But then, if you were to raise that to that point, the physical skill is manifested more in terms of your fingers playing something, the way you're holding an object, and so on. Let's take the example of driving a car, for instance. Now, driving a car goes much, much beyond sitting at the driving wheel. You need to have a sense of the physical space that that car is occupying on the road. You need to have a sense of where everybody else is situated with reference to that car. You need to have a sense of what speeds to which you are allowed to go and what speeds you are trying to go. You need to be aware of the mechanics of operating that car. And you need to have some kind of a synchronization between the various aspects of modifying that mechanism, whether you're changing the gear, whether you are braking somewhere, whether you're going over a hump, whatever it is that you try and do in the process of driving a car, you will notice that the learning that you had done earlier, the very procedure of driving a car, has now been translated, has now been passed on to your skeletal muscles, your eyes, your ears. You're listening in, you're looking at the road, you are operating certain levers, and all of these, when they come into a synchronous performance, it's only at that point in time that you can safely, efficiently drive a car. Very similar to the playing of an instrument also. Now, so therefore, when you have all those individual facts which you had laid out into a procedure and then somehow allowed the muscles of your body to have acquired the skills of operating these, it is only then that you would have reached a point where you are driving a car. Hold on to this example. This could be very critical in understanding the distinction between teaching and learning. Let me take the example of transacting money. Let me take an example of, let's say that you go to a shop and you want to buy something, and let's say that the bill comes to something like 42 rupees. And you pass on a 100 rupee note to the shopkeeper and await that the shopkeeper is going to return back some change. How does the shopkeeper arrive at that number or that amount of money that he has to return to you? It is likely that he is going to say, do you have 2 rupees? Now, if you do have, then his transaction is going to be modified. He's going to say, all right, you have actually given me 102 rupees. And now I'll try and figure out how to reach from 42 rupees to 102 rupees. And it's likely that he would pull out a 10 rupee note to begin with, and then count off a 50 rupee note. He could possibly be doing this completely differently. He could use a calculator. He would say 100 minus 42 is so much. And then he would go about trying to figure out what are the denominations that he has. It's also likely that he is going to, find various combinations of notes to arrive at this money. Now, the issue doesn't stop at that point. Once he returns the money, you are going to compute it again. So in fact, while the shopkeeper was trying to return the money, you were already computing how much money you're going to get back. And you had your own way of counting that onwards. Notice that this entire process of counting money was not something that was already a learned procedure and you followed that procedure exactly the way in which it ought to be done each time. This is slightly distinct from the changing of a gear on a car, for instance. That each time that you would transact this money, you would do it differently. That all of them are equivalent. Now let us ask, how does this person who is transacting this money come to have learnt this skill? Along the way, what we had taught him was various algorithmic ways in which numbers could be added, that one could move on the number line from the left to the right, and that the money that you have, the numbers that are displayed on the notes that you have can be converted into pure numbers, and you don't really need to be worrying about notes. So somewhere along the way, the person knows that 2 10 rupee notes are equivalent to a 20 rupee note, and then something else is equivalent to a 50 rupee note, and so on. So essentially, this person has accumulated all those individual facts that he received over a period of time, converted them into various kinds of procedures, and he can see that one procedure is the same as the other, and that when he was given a problem of computing how much money has to be returned, had a way of transacting it, had a way of using that learning to solve this particular problem at hand. Now, all along this way, you would also notice that the person was watching himself do this learning. This person was watching the particular numbers that were coming out. So there was some particular green note which came out of his case, and the green note itself gave him an indication that this was a 20 rupee note, and then he computed that and so on and so forth. So he was doing what we would term as learning to learn. He was watching himself, he was correcting the facts that were being encountered, he was combining various facts in different ways, and he was all the time evaluating whether that particular procedure was correct or not. And assuming that he made a mess of this whole thing and actually gave you more or gave you less, he would revisit this problem perhaps in a slightly different way, which means his capacity to relearn, his capacity to modify the learning that he has is going to aid the process of detecting a problem, finding an alternate solution to that problem, and thereby correcting that problem. So if this is what is learning, we will have to examine how children can be passed on this legacy, how they can be taught how to learn facts, how they can be learning procedures, how they can convert those procedures into skills, how they can hold on to all of these great pieces of information that they will acquire over their years of learning, and constantly watch this knowledge map that they have playing on in their minds, combining them again and again in different ways to solve the various different kinds of problems that they will encounter. So we believe that learning, therefore, is a constant renegotiation of our knowledge map. The facts that you acquired, the procedures that you acquired, the skills that you learned, we claim is being organized in our mind in the form of some kind of a map. And this map is distinct from a physical map, a geographical map, which in a way is fixed. This is a dynamically changing map. Each time you have a problem, each time you have a different set of facts to attend to, you would reorganize things in your head. You would call for particular kinds of information. You will put them in different orders, and you would attend to the particular problem. So there is an appreciation of the problem at hand. There is an appreciation of the rules that you have for that. There is an appreciation of the facts that you have at hand. And in the solving of a problem, you will notice that you are being challenged and you are responding to that challenge. This challenge itself can be of two kinds. One, due to forces which are outside oneself. Interaction with the outside world, the problem at hand that you had. You suddenly encountered a road bump. You need to change the speed of your car. You need to go over that safely without damaging your car. You need to not lose speed. You shouldn't stall the car, and so on and so forth. So this new information that you constantly acquire from the world outside is in a way prompting you to modify your knowledge map. The various problem situations that you deal with, the problem situations that you encounter, also in a way provide us the opportunity to revisit that map and to modify it. And many a time, there could be new challenges which are posed, things which we had never heard of. I mean, you imagine a sculptor, he would start off with a huge block of wood or stone or whichever other material that he's working with, and he would try and imagine which portions of those have to be removed in order for him to arrive at the figurine that he's trying to make. So whether it is creation, whether it is solution, whether it is analysis, whether it is simple response to a particular situation, the outside interactions provide a challenge, provide a problem situation, provide new information, which enables us to renegotiate our knowledge map. It could show weaknesses in that map. It could show gaps in that map, facts which we don't have at that point in time, and we may have to respond. To which we involve in inside interactions. Most of the time, we are constantly looking at our map, constantly responding to these outside influences. We do what is known in psychology as assimilation and accommodation. Something which is newly acquired, we simply acquire it, store it, and put it into this map, accommodate it if it requires a little pushing of an existing map, maybe removing a gap, maybe making a new connection. In a way, modifying that map to accommodate this new information that you received. And constantly, when you're trying to apply this to problem situations, when you're trying to solve problems, you'll notice that you may have to repair, you may have to find faults with your existing map, and you will have to constantly maintain it. And in the process of applying this to newer problem situations, in the process of creating newer things, you will also have to use that learning to learn, which is watching one's learning, which is trying to evolve strategies of learning, which is finding out What are we very good at? Are we good at remembering things? Are we good at making connections? Are we good at visualizing some new things? What are those techniques, skills which will help us become more and more efficient at learning? So learning, in a way, is a very constant renegotiation of our knowledge map. The knowledge map itself is not something which is fixed, almost on a day-to-day basis, almost on a minute-to-minute basis. It is changing in response to the outside interactions and the inside interactions that we are having with us. Therefore, we'll try and define learning as some kind of a personal journey that every individual will have to learn to do and do. Now, what are those factors which will help that person do it? Of course, that will require a much larger talk. Maybe you might like to revisit it. There could be things like interest. There could be things like attitude. There could be things like, the very exposure to this, the access to information and so on, which will enable or come in the way of making this personal journey a smooth journey. But then this journey is very essential to nurture one's knowledge. And it is only learning which can foster learning. And kindly attend to this, because this has implications for what we have always believed till now, that teaching could do the job, that a science textbook could do the job, that activities in the class could do the job, that the video that we played out could do the job, that something being animated, something being demonstrated, some physical activity that was being organized in the classroom could actually foster learning. Do they? We will have to question this. We'll have to figure out that perhaps what teachers do in the classroom can at best model out what? Model out their own learning. A teacher in a way is saying, this is the way I learned. I am showing this to you. Perhaps this is going to inspire you. Perhaps this is going to interest you. Perhaps this is going to show you a way in which you can also learn. The teacher could demonstrate this learning. The teacher could demonstrate a phenomenon. The teacher could provide an opportunity for the child to attend to various facts, various pieces of information in this, and the relative links between them, the connections between these ideas, and perhaps get inspired. And the teacher also plays a very important role in challenging the learning of a child. Ask the child to account for that learning, question the child's knowledge, provide an opportunity to poke a hole in the map of that child, provide an opportunity for the child to look at that gap and try to see how to fill that up. Now, that is what the teacher can do. So if we revisit the map that we looked at earlier, the model that we looked at earlier, perhaps teaching stops at the learner. And learning is something that happens when teaching is over. Now, the teachers also function as a technology. In the lower classes, for instance, we are aware that children's speed at which they can appreciate language is not good enough. So we slow down. We use visual aids. We do activities. We structure our teaching in a manner in which it could be more useful to the particular learner that we have. We involve experimentation, demonstration, and various other such problem-solving ideas with older children. We are in a way repackaging learning to fit the needs of that learner. So based on the age, based on the exposure, based on the capabilities of those learners, we might modify learning, modify teaching so that it becomes easier for the child to experience learning. And in treated that way, teacher is actually a technology. Teaching is a technology. The teacher itself is a part of that technology. And when the teacher starts using, let's say, information technology, let's say uses the video, uses the internet, uses various software applications, uses the projection, uses this online learning, what the teacher is doing is that the teacher is trying to overcome some impediments that the situation provided. For instance, in the online learning situation, the child was geographically removed from that teacher. And so therefore, the connection had to be established, re-established. So therefore, the teacher used technology to extend what the teacher's functionality was. That the teacher could not face that child and speak, and therefore found a remote way in which that could be done. The teacher is also the technology or the video or the animation or the worksheet or the examination paper or a set of problems that you're given or an experiment that you have asked the children to do is functioning as a proxy teacher. But don't please get carried away by the technological use, because it could perhaps interfere or even disrupt learning. Let's consider a few examples. You might believe that a video that you are showing is an excellent depiction of a phenomena, and therefore would form a very useful input to the child. But what it could end up doing is tell the child that you don't have to think. You just watch this, store all this information as facts with you, and you have already solved it. Now, because the child has not engaged with this idea, broken this thing apart, put them back together, did not do what we call as analysis, synthesis, evaluation, the child has not learned anything but has only stored information, which has the danger of being forgotten. And therefore, rather than enabling learning, this video, in its anxiety to represent something in all its glory, has come in the way of a child learning. I'll stop at this stage, and I would be very happy to address questions or engage in a debate with all of you. Thank you. Shall I stop my share, ma'am?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir, you can.
I hope I haven't overshot your time.
No, it's perfectly fine. Everybody has thoroughly enjoyed. And the reality is you being in the department of CIE in NCRT, and we were expecting a little more flavor of technology, but beautifully you have shared that. I love the thing that teacher himself or herself is technology. So that's the best part. I think when we talk about the resources are not there for anybody and everybody. It's a bold message that teacher herself is a technology, and where we are bragging about the interactive classrooms or the smart classrooms. Again, that is basically blocking the child's thinking. Very rightly, you have said that just watch, store information, and move ahead. I also love the way you have conveyed the 4 factors which affect learning. Sir, there is a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Presently, the things which you have shared, they have actually given us a thought. We will rethink. There are so many other questions which are arising. But presently, there is another question. The assessment of students has not taken place, or the testing has not been taken place in the previous academic session. And as per the government rules, all the students, they are promoted to the next class. Though no standardized testing is there if the schools say the testing was being done. So how at this stage teachers will deal with those students? Will you please give some tips for that? Second is that there are a large number of students, those who have never been to the school, those who have never seen the school, but probably in the last 1.5 years, they are attending the online classes. What will be the impact on those students when they will join the classes? I mean, how we should be prepared for it?
Okay, depending upon how cynical I would be about this whole thing called schooling, I might, give you an extreme answers on 2 extreme ends. But let me try and see if I can help you appreciate the question itself rather than trying to come to a very conclusive kind of answers. The reason being that the answers could play out differently with different people depending upon the context in which they are, the kind of children that they are facing up to, whether they are very young children, whether they are very old children, whether they are children whose families have been able to support those children, and so on. So based on the complexity that each teacher experiences, I would request that they look at the first principles that we would like to apply in this case. What do we assess when we conduct a test in the class? It is common notion that we have completed a syllabus, we have expected some learning to happen in children, and that this test paper would give an opportunity for the child to defend its own learning about this topic. And therefore, the examination is usually used as a way to report back to the child that this is what your learning is. Now, I would argue that this is too simplistic a solution and is an inadequate way of utilizing a large investment of time and effort. In fact, in most schools, close to about 100 days are spent on examinations, on setting question papers, on actually conducting the examinations, on evaluation, on reporting things into the report card. Various activities that are surrounding these examinations occupy something like 100 days in the school. Out of a possible 200 to 220 days, we are spending a disproportionate amount of time on this examination. It should be used for a much larger purpose. Now, what governs the performance of this child? My argument is that to begin with, it is a representation of how good that syllabus was. How good the textbooks, the activities, the language used in the textbooks, the diagrams that were used in the textbook enabled this process called learning. And if we started off with a very bad textbook, if we had started off with a syllabus which was not well articulated, if we had started off with a subject which was not given due justice by this textbook, then we have already played with one input in that, which evaluation actually points to. When you evaluate and children don't perform, you need to also ask how good was the syllabus or how good were the inputs that we provided. Now, this syllabus, this input was interpreted by the teacher. The teacher used various kinds of modifications in that. And to the extent that the teacher appreciated how the subject has to be organized, how the subject should be communicated to children, she did her job. Now, and as we argued in our talk earlier, all these processes stopped at that point where learning began. And beyond that point, the child should have played with it, which required that this outside influence, that is the teacher, the homework that you gave, the classwork that you gave, the kinds of questions that were asked in the examination, the kinds of expectations that were communicated to children about examinations itself, about the level of answers that were expected, the language skills that the children had in not only reading that question, understanding that question, but also in building up, constructing an answer to that question and responding back. Now, when you look at all those gamut of variables that are associated with a test, to try and simplistically say that we did not do examinations, we did not evaluate children. Frankly, you have never evaluated children even in your regular schools. But that, as I mentioned, is an extreme position that I take. Perhaps every teacher would have an opportunity to look at what they are doing and ask themselves, what is it that I am doing when I am doing evaluation? And if I'm not able to do the evaluation in a manner in which I was always used to in this new pandemic situation, is there an alternate way in which I can do the same thing? Is there a way in which I can provoke a child to account for the learning that that child has experienced? Could, for instance, a good set of homework suffice as a good evaluation input for you? Can you make a judgment of that child's learning? Finally, what is it that we want to assure parents? What is it that we want to assure children? That the time and effort investment that the child made in the learning has fructified, has resulted in learning, and that there are no gaps in that learning, and that knowledge map renegotiation, the knowledge map construction that the child engaged with is adequate for that level. So for a child to be passed from 8th standard to 9th standard, what you require is that the child at the 8th standard has acquired all those capabilities, all those things that you had believed the child would acquire, and is ready to be in the class 9 and will benefit from all those newer inputs that you will provide in class 9. So therefore, I only believe that all you need to do is reimagine. All you need to do is to find out alternate technological ways, the test, the question paper, the answer paper, the particular answers that children write are a part of the technology that you use to assess children. If that technology doesn't work, find another technology. But you will be able to attend to that issue only if the central concern of this entire evaluation is to assess whether children have learnt and whether adequate feedback has been provided to the child. And as a consequence of that feedback, the child is able to correct the poorer learning that must have happened, the gaps that must have existed in that learning, and is able to reconstruct the map adequately for further learning that must be engaged with.
Thank you, sir. I request Monica ma'am to kindly give the audio right to Sunita Rajiv ma'am. She has 2 questions. And after that, Tara ma'am has raised her hand. Tara ma'am, can you post the question in the chat box or in the Q&A box? Monica ma'am, please give the audio right to Sunita Rajiv.
Done.
And then give the audio right to Kavita Chaudhary ma'am after that. Sunita ma'am, over to you, please.
We can't hear. Ma'am.
Sunita ma'am, we cannot hear.
Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am. Now you're audible.
Oh, great, great. Thank you so much, Mukta ma'am. It was just fascinating discussion, rather the presentation by sir. So my question was regarding the children, because all the children that whom we teach, are they all capable of processing their knowledge? And critically thinking is one thing which a teacher tussles with. So my question was that do you think every child engages in processing the lesson learned, analyzes it, critically thinks about it? Because our system does not train teachers to make thinking visible. So if you could just throw some light on that, sir. And if also please tell us, how would you spark the love for learning to learn among students? Kindly guide, sir.
Sure. You have perhaps already answered your question, but nevertheless, let me try and expand on that. The first step that we are trying to say here is that the teacher is someone who is going to model out learning. The very process of teaching is not as if the teacher has something to pass on to the child, but is supposed to expect it to inspire in that child. Now, if the child has been given the tools of learning, if the demand for learning has been placed at the feet of that child, and if that child's the activities that you have designed are such that you will expect that child to demonstrate one's own learning. If this becomes the routine, for instance, if I were to teach a child cycling, and at some point in time, I remove let us say, the training wheels, or I even remove my hand from that seat which I was holding to support that child on the cycle, the very act of cycling independently is a demonstration to the child that the child can now perform an activity which hitherto it was incapable of. This is that structure that we need to sort of abstract out and apply to each of these cases. Take that particular example of money transaction. What did it prove to us? If someone can efficiently transact money, it means that that child or that person has learned addition, subtraction, and now has a very good hang of how numbers are located on a number line and how the process of addition, subtraction, multiplication affect the numbers. I mean, how one can recombine numbers to yield other numbers on that number line. So in a way, transacting of money is an evaluation of what we taught in addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. So when you treat education in that manner, children would get a model in front of them that learning is something that they have to become responsible for. The teacher cannot teach something. The teacher can teach, but the teacher cannot learn on your behalf. That the learning is something that you have to indulge in, and that the teacher would constantly expect you to account for the effort that you have put in, demonstrate to us that you have actually learned, produce that result of that thinking that you are doing, and this becomes a habit. Of course, the tools of this is language and mathematics. And to begin with, right from day one, we are gradually building up on the complexity of both of these tools, the language as well as mathematics, and enabling children the tools to learn. But the challenge that we throw at them should morph from mere recall of information to actually trying to modify that child's knowledge map, to address newer problems, to see how a newer solution can be proposed for that problem. So there are, if you think through this, there would be lots of smaller techniques that you can think of, and these could help you figure out a strategy by which you will make a demand on this. Now, the question of whether a child is capable of this or not capable of this. We believe that the child was capable of being in school, and therefore we admitted this child in school. And except if there is some psychological or physical issues with that child, we believe that the environment, if enriched adequately, would provide adequate opportunity for that child to learn, and that every child innately wants to learn, wants to excel, wants to show to the world that that child is also good enough. And if we can provoke that, the challenge before the child will stand up to it. Does it mean that everybody is going to score 100? I don't really know. And this is not the forum in which we should really be addressing that. But maximizing the potential of that child, enabling that child, giving the child all the tools that that child deserves is what schooling should be all about. Yes, ma'am?
Ma'am, you can give the audio video right to Kavita Chaudhary.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you.
Kavita Chaudhary, ma'am. And then Vidya, ma'am.
Yeah, Vidya ma'am has the right. Now I'll share.
Vidya ma'am, you can ask your question.
Unmute yourself, ma'am. Okay, let me.
Vidya ma'am, unmute yourself.
Kavita ma'am, you can try.
Yes, ma'am. Good evening, all of you. Sir, I just wanted to ask that when we were talking about that how the students can be provoked to learning, what role do we as teachers play there? Because we are teaching them, we are like in online mode, even in hybrid mode, which might be the future. How we as teachers can play a role in shaping the future of our students.
See, one is that you stop giving them information. One, you give them challenges, you give them problems, you give them tasks to do. It could be a simple reading something and writing about it. For instance, if there was a story in the English textbook, I would believe that that story has been written at a level at which a child of that class can read. So therefore, placing a demand on that child that you read this story and you modify the following characters in this to these characters and then restate the story in your own words would be an adequate opportunity for that child to think through this whole activity and to produce something which is individual, which is original. And that is something that could very easily be done. This is just a off-the-cuff one example that I could think of to communicate the principle that I would use, that the idea is not for the teacher to communicate something, but for the teacher to provide an opportunity for the child to communicate back something. So provide an opportunity for the child to learn. And teaching is not necessarily communicating facts inside your textbook, inside your syllabus, but to provide various opportunities for children to challenge their existing maps and to modify those maps.
Right, sir. Thank you very much, sir. So I had one more question. I am a maths teacher, so basically teaching grade 10, 11. And I have faced this situation that many a times we are trying to teach, maybe we are asking them to find out some concepts that they can explain in the class, but it has become increasingly difficult to get something out of them. Maybe I am not able to motivate them that way that I'm getting something out of them. So I think that in these 1.5 years, there has been a learning gap. So how are we going to fill that gap, and how can we expect the students to get the answers which we are expecting?
You see, the point is that none of us have a magic wand with us. You inherit a group of children who, thanks to their past learning, thanks to their past training in learning, would have reached some stage of independent learning. They may or may not be completely capable of that. If you have the time, if you have the means, then do invest some time on trying to point out to them how useful it is, how exciting it is to be trying to learn on your own. But if you are chasing the 10th standard examination, perhaps you do not really have the time for it. So do not try and expect this across every child in your class. It might be too late. And if I were to suggest a solution of this kind, I would say this is a whole school solution. You cannot start off only in the 10th standard. You will have to start off a little earlier. Maybe much earlier, right, in the primary school, that this is becoming the habit, the credo of the school itself. But nevertheless, if you are excited about your learning, if you are able to demonstrate to them that I went to this website, I saw this particular set of problems, this is what was very exciting about it, I did not know the solution of this, I struggled with this, I tried and did all of this, and that is what you're demonstrating in the class. It is not as if you are saying, I know the answer, you don't know the answer, I'm going to teach you this answer.
Yes.
So the very model of a teacher is that of a very efficient learner, a person who knows how to learn, and that is being demonstrated to the child. And if that can be done consistently, I believe that there would be a larger and larger number of children who would be inspired to at least attempt it. I'm not saying that, it would immediately be possible for every child to acquire this, but the demand that you make on that child to own up the learning that that child has will go a long way in at least communicating to that child that it is capable of learning on its own.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Rajaram sir. So I'll
Yes,
now
ma'am.
come to Harish Chaudhary sir. Harish sir, your idea about reimagining education post-COVID.
No, I don't think I'll comment on that because I've had long discussions with Professor Rajaram sir. And opening that up would be opening up a very long debate. I think it was a fascinating session. I don't think any one of us has the answers or the perfect answers. So Mukta ma'am, I'll refrain from commenting on reimagining education. But I would still ask myself just a question, not an answer. What is the minimum requirement of education? What is the purpose of education? Does every child really need to know the atomic chart and the various theorems of mathematics and integral calculus and so on? Or if we focus just on the fundamentals, are we okay with it? So I'll leave it there. Thank you so much.
It's always said that a question arouses thinking, and that is really mandatory for living. So thank you so much, Dr. Sija. Last sentence wrapping up your idea about reimagining education post-COVID.
First, let me applaud Dr. Raja. So beautifully explained everything about. It's unbelievable that learning is so much from this session. Hats off to you, sir. You have said one thing which Dr. Mukta also repeated, that teacher functions as a technology. I still believe and very strongly believe teacher makes or breaks. It is the inspiration of the teacher which makes a complete difference. In ancient time, I don't know, depending on the Rajkul, Gurukul, or some other Gurukul, was there a fixed syllabi? I do not know. But if I take it to today's time, post-pandemic, especially disruption, that is the problems are bound to come. This is what our children have learned. There's no immediate solution. This our children have learned. But how do we find a solution? How do we pick up those skills, attributes, values, which are essentially required? How do we integrate technology to learn, connect with each other? I think the only answer I feel is the teacher and the role of teacher. In any situation, if something is to be reimagined, it is the teacher who can do that one. Irrespective of constraints, irrespective of any policy, the teacher wants, he can conquer the whole thing. So my only submission is, let's empower our teacher through ways, through using newer pedagogies, newer skills, so that she remains the classroom leader and leader of education. Thank you very much. Over to you, Dr.
Thank you so much. I think we really want to listen more and more, and the participants also, they want to ask more questions, but time is not permitting us. So you can always post the questions in the WhatsApp group of the participants. They will be forwarded to Rajaram sir, and the answers for sure they'll reach you. With this, I just wrap up, and I thank you everyone. Thank you Rajaram sir for this vibrant session.
Yes, ma'am, it's my pleasure.
Thank you Dr. Sija. Thank you Harish sir. Thank you Kriti and Monica and lovely participants. You have been really engaged all through. I could see the chat box. So over to Kriti ma'am for the formal vote of thanks.
Thank you, ma'am. Good evening, everyone. I, Kriti Kapoor, on behalf of Samurja Educational Society, would like to thank our key speaker, respected Dr. Rajaram Sharma sir, for enlightening us with his knowledge. Today's talk show was full of knowledge. It gave deep insights to the topic and also revealed some interesting facts. Those are that learning is constant renegotiation for our knowledge map. Also, learning is a personal journey to nurture one's knowledge. Lastly, teachers function as a technology. I'm pretty sure the precious knowledge that sir gave us will definitely help us in our future classrooms. Also, I would like to thank Dr. Rajesh Hasija sir and Professor Harish Chaudhary sir for taking out time from their busy schedule and enlightening us with the knowledge. Thank you so much. I would also like to thank Dr. Mukta Mishra ma'am for giving us opportunity to be part of such informative talk shows. I want to thank the team Samurja and Monica ma'am who really worked hard to make this talk show successful. Also, thank you to all the participants present here for paying your attention and learning. Once again, thank you everyone. Namaskar.
Thank you. Big thank you to you also, Kriti. Thank you so much.